The afternoon light filtered through the drawing-room windows of Brookstone Manor, casting golden patterns across the Persian carpet where Helena sat with her embroidery. Her needle moved with practiced precision, creating delicate roses that would never wilt, never fade. Unlike the expectations that had surrounded her since her 20th birthday, now 5 years past, the house had grown quieter with each passing season, each sister's departure leaving behind empty chambers and fading memories of laughter that once filled these halls. Margaret had been the first to marry, securing a match with Lord Ashworth when Helena was merely 17. The wedding had been a spectacle of ivory silk and orange blossoms, with half the county in attendance. Helena remembered standing in the church, watching her eldest sister process down the aisle with their father's arm linked through hers, and feeling only joy for Margaret's happiness. There had been no whisper of envy then, no shadow of concern for her own future. She was young, after all, with plenty of time for such matters. Caroline followed 2 years later, capturing the heart of Viscount Pembridge after a single season in London. The courtship had been swift and passionate, marked by stolen glances across ballrooms and hurried exchanges of letters. Helena had helped Caroline prepare her trousseau, folding chemises and petticoats with steady hands, while her sister chattered excitedly about her new life. The wedding breakfast had lasted until evening, and Helena had danced until her feet ached, genuinely delighted by Caroline's good fortune. Then came Sophia's turn, the sister closest to Helena in age and temperament. When Lord Thornbury began calling at Brookstone Manor with increasing frequency, Helena had been the first to notice the particular way Sophia's cheeks flushed at his arrival. She had encouraged the match, even as something small and quiet stirred in her chest. Not jealousy, never that, but perhaps the faint recognition that patterns were forming, and she was somehow outside them. Sophia's wedding had been more intimate, held in the spring when the garden roses were in full bloom. Helena had stood as her sister's witness, pressing a handkerchief into Sophia's trembling hands before the ceremony, whispering words of encouragement, even as she wondered when her own turn might come. But it hadn't come. Season after season passed, and Helena remained at Brookstone Manor, watching the social landscape shift around her like sand beneath an outgoing tide. She attended balls and assemblies, accepted invitations to country house parties, and conducted herself with the same grace and dignity that had been drilled into her since childhood. Gentlemen danced with her, conversed with her, even enjoyed her company, but none pursued her with the determination required to overcome what gradually became an unspoken truth. Helena Brookstone was somehow different, somehow set apart. Her mother, Lady Brookstone, never spoke of it directly, but Helena could read the worry in the tightening corners of her mouth, the way her gaze would linger too long when Helena entered a room. After Sophia's departure, those looks became more frequent, accompanied by gentle suggestions about accepting invitations she might otherwise decline, about smiling more readily at gatherings, about not appearing too serious or too clever in mixed company. Helena obliged these suggestions without complaint, understanding they came from love rather than criticism, but she could not transform herself into something she was not. The truth was that Helena possessed an intelligence that made some men uncomfortable, and a composure that others mistook for coldness. She could discuss literature and philosophy with equal ease, had opinions on matters of politics and economy that extended beyond what was considered appropriate for a young woman, and possessed an unsettling ability to see through pretense and flattery. Where her sisters had been warm sunshine, Helena was still water, deep, clear, and somehow less immediately inviting despite her genuine kindness. She was beautiful, undeniably so, but hers was not the kind of beauty that announced itself. Margaret had possessed golden curls and dimpled cheeks that drew eyes across crowded rooms. Caroline's dark hair and flashing eyes had made her the subject of poetry from at least 3 aspiring suitors. Sophia's delicate features and musical laugh had enchanted everyone who met her. Helena's beauty required closer examination, the elegant line of her throat, the intelligence in her grey eyes, the subtle strength in her bearing. It was the kind of beauty that revealed itself slowly, that grew more striking with familiarity rather than fading with it. By her 25th year, Helena had made peace with her situation. She did not hide away at Brookstone Manor, nursing wounded pride or bitter disappointment. Instead, she cultivated other aspects of her life with quiet determination. She read voraciously, building a personal library that rivaled her father's. She learned to play the pianoforte with skill, rather than merely competence. She took an active role in managing the household, developing an expertise in matters of economy and domestic administration that her mother came to rely upon. She visited tenants regularly, bringing not just charity but genuine interest in their welfare, learning their names and circumstances with the same attention she applied to her books. The village women loved her. The servants at Brookstone Manor respected her. Her father, Sir William Brookstone, took pride in her capable management of estate matters during his frequent trips to London. Only her mother seemed unable to reconcile Helena's contentment with her unmarried state, as if happiness without a husband was somehow incomplete or suspect. "You must not give up hope," Lady Brookstone would say, usually while they took tea together in the afternoon. "The right gentleman simply has not appeared yet." Helena never contradicted her mother, but privately she had stopped thinking in such terms. Hope implied waiting, expecting, looking forward to something that might never materialize. Instead, she had learned to exist fully in her present circumstances, finding meaning and purpose in the life she actually lived, rather than the one she might have lived. If marriage came, she would face it with the same dignity she brought to all things. If it did not, she would continue building a life worth living on her own terms. The season she turned 25, her parents stopped pressing her to attend every event in the county. Perhaps they sensed her quiet resistance, or perhaps they simply grew weary of the unspoken questions that followed them. Why was the youngest Brookstone daughter still unmarried? Was there some defect of character or circumstance? The speculation never reached Helena's ears directly, but she understood human nature well enough to know it existed. She bore it with the same patient grace she brought to everything else, neither seeking to justify herself nor caring overmuch what others thought. It was during this period of accepted spinsterhood, if 25 could be called such, that Helena first heard the name Edmund Fairley spoken with particular emphasis. The Duke of Ashford had become something of a legend in society, young, wealthy, unmarried, and seemingly determined to remain so despite the machinations of every ambitious mother in England. Stories about him circulated like currency at gatherings. His horses were the finest in the country. His estate in Derbyshire was magnificent beyond description. His political influence extended into the highest circles of government, and his aloofness toward marriage-minded young ladies was absolute. Helena paid little attention to such gossip. The world of dukes and their doings seemed far removed from her quiet life at Brookstone Manor. She had attended enough assemblies to know that every season produced its share of eligible bachelors who became objects of competitive pursuit, and she had learned to view such competitions with detached amusement. The desperation underlying the bright smiles and calculated encounters struck her as somehow sad, reducing what should be matters of the heart to mere strategic calculations. But Edmund Fairley was different, or so the whispers insisted. He was not simply avoiding marriage, he was approaching it as he might approach a complex diplomatic negotiation, with careful consideration and absolute refusal to be rushed or manipulated. Mothers found him frustratingly immune to their daughters' charms. Young ladies discovered that flirtation and flattery slid off him like rain from marble. He danced when politeness required it, conversed when propriety demanded it, and maintained a cordial distance that somehow made him even more desirable. "They say he has a list," Caroline mentioned during one of her visits to Brookstone Manor, her eyes bright with the pleasure of sharing particularly juicy gossip. She had brought her 2 young children for a fortnight, and the house had come alive again with their laughter and noise. "An actual written list of qualities he seeks in a duchess. Can you imagine anything so coldly calculated?" Helena, who was sitting on the floor helping her nephew build towers from wooden blocks, smiled faintly. "It sounds remarkably sensible, actually. Marriage is a serious undertaking. Why should it not be approached with the same consideration one would give to any other important decision?" Caroline laughed, but there was an edge of discomfort in it. "You would say that, dearest, but surely there must be room for feeling, for passion. Lord Pembridge swept me off my feet, and I shall be forever grateful he did not pause to consult a list before declaring himself." "You were fortunate that passion and practicality aligned," Helena replied, steadying a block that threatened to topple. "Not everyone is so lucky. Perhaps the Duke understands this and seeks to avoid the misery of an ill-suited match." The conversation moved on to other topics, but the image of Edmund Fairley remained in Helena's mind, not as a romantic figure, but as a curious one. A man who approached marriage with deliberation rather than impulse, who valued qualities beyond a pretty face or substantial dowry, who refused to be rushed by societal pressure or family expectation. In her own way, Helena understood such a position. She too had learned that patience and principle mattered more than following prescribed paths simply because everyone else did. She did not expect to ever meet the Duke of Ashford. Their social circles, while overlapping in the broadest sense, did not regularly intersect. Dukes attended gatherings of significance, high-profile balls in London, house parties hosted by other members of the nobility, events that mattered in the complex web of political and social influence. Helena's world was smaller, centered around county assemblies, local charity events, and the occasional visit to London for a week or two when her parents insisted. But fate, or perhaps merely circumstance, has a way of arranging encounters that logic suggests should never occur. The connection came through Helena's father, Sir William, who served on a parliamentary committee alongside several influential peers, including the Duke of Ashford. A mutual interest in agricultural reform and estate management had developed into a professional respect that occasionally extended into social invitations. When the Duke mentioned he would be travelling through their county to inspect a property he was considering purchasing, Sir William issued a dinner invitation without thinking much of it, certainly without any matrimonial designs. Lady Brookstone, however, thought of little else once she learned the Duke of Ashford would be dining at Brookstone Manor. For 3 days before his arrival, the house became a flurry of activity. Menus were debated and revised, furniture was rearranged, and every surface was polished until it gleamed. Helena watched these preparations with mild amusement, understanding her mother's excitement even if she could not quite share it. "You must wear your blue silk," Lady Brookstone insisted the morning of the dinner. "It brings out your eyes beautifully, and your father says the Duke appreciates elegance without ostentation." Helena agreed without argument, though she suspected the Duke would pay little attention to what she wore. The evening would be a formal affair, probably stiff and somewhat tedious, filled with the kind of polite conversation that revealed nothing of substance. She would fulfill her role as daughter of the house with her usual grace, and by the following day, the Duke would continue on his journey, and life would return to its ordinary rhythm. She dressed carefully that evening, not out of any desire to impress, but because she took pride in her appearance and respected the occasion. The blue silk gown was indeed becoming, cut in the current fashion, but not so extreme as to appear foolish. She wore her mother's pearls, simple and elegant, and arranged her dark hair in a style that emphasized the long line of her neck. When she studied her reflection in the looking-glass, she saw not a woman desperately seeking to catch a duke's attention, but simply herself, poised, dignified, and quietly confident. The Duke arrived precisely at the appointed hour, which somehow did not surprise Helena. From her position at the top of the stairs, she heard his voice in the entrance hall below, deeper than she had expected, with a measured quality that suggested careful consideration of words before speaking them. She descended slowly, her hand light on the banister, and caught her first glimpse of Edmund Fairley as he handed his gloves to their butler. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair touched with auburn highlights that caught the candlelight. His features were strong rather than classically handsome, a firm jaw, straight nose, and eyes of an unusual color somewhere between grey and green. He carried himself with the unconscious authority of someone who had never questioned his place in the world, yet there was nothing arrogant in his bearing. Instead, Helena sensed a kind of watchful intelligence, as if he were constantly observing and evaluating his surroundings with the same care he supposedly applied to selecting a duchess. Their eyes met as she reached the bottom of the stairs, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of interest perhaps, or merely acknowledgement of her presence. He bowed with practiced grace while her father made introductions, and when he took her hand his grip was firm but not presumptuous. "Miss Brookstone," he said, his voice as measured in direct conversation as it had sounded from a distance. Your father speaks of you with great pride. Your Grace is kind to say so, Helena replied, withdrawing her hand after the appropriate interval. I hope your journey was pleasant. Tolerable, he said, a hint of amusement touching the corners of his mouth. Though I confess I prefer my own horses to hired ones. They have a better understanding of my temperament. It was such an unexpected admission that Helena smiled genuinely rather than merely politely. And what temperament is that, if I may ask? Impatient with unnecessary delays and disinclined toward elaborate demonstrations, he said, holding her gaze. I suspect your father's horses share similar qualities based on the specimens I observed in your stable. Before Helena could respond, her mother intervened with practiced social grace, guiding them toward the drawing room where pre-dinner conversation would unfold according to rigid custom. Helena found herself seated near the Duke, positioned so that conversation was almost obligatory while remaining appropriately public. Lady Brookstone had clearly orchestrated this arrangement, though Helena suspected the Duke was too perceptive not to notice the strategy. What followed, however, was not the awkward exchange Helena had anticipated. Instead of the usual banal pleasantries about weather and local scenery, Edmund Fairley proved to be genuinely interested in the agricultural improvements her father had implemented on the estate. He asked questions that demonstrated actual knowledge rather than polite pretense, and when Helena contributed observations about the success of crop rotation in their southern fields, he turned his attention to her with the same seriousness he had given her father. You take an active interest in estate management, he asked, and there was no condescension in the question, only curiosity. I find it more engaging than embroidery, Helena replied honestly, though I am competent at both. His laugh was unexpected, genuine and unguarded, transforming his serious features into something warmer. A useful combination, I imagine. Beauty and practicality rarely coexist so harmoniously. Helena felt her cheeks warm slightly, not from coquettish pleasure, but from the straightforwardness of his observation. He had not delivered a flowery compliment designed to flatter. Instead, he had stated what he perceived as fact, with the same directness he might note that the sky was blue or water was wet. There was something refreshing in such honesty, even if the subject was herself. Dinner proceeded with the formal precision such occasions demanded, but Helena found herself paying more attention than usual. The Duke conversed easily with her parents, demonstrating knowledge on subjects ranging from parliamentary proceedings to recent developments in natural philosophy. He did not dominate the conversation, nor did he recede into polite silence. Instead, he participated with an engaged interest that made even topics Helena normally found tedious somehow more compelling. When her mother raised the subject of his estate in Derbyshire, clearly hoping to direct conversation toward more personal matters, the Duke responded with surprising candor. Ashford House is beautiful but lonely, he said, his expression growing more remote. My parents died when I was young, and I inherited responsibility before I had developed the wisdom to carry it gracefully. I have spent the years since attempting to rectify that imbalance. The admission hung in the air, more revealing than he perhaps intended. Helena understood in that moment that beneath the legendary aloofness lay not coldness, but rather an acute awareness of duty and the weight of expectations. He had not avoided marriage because he disdained it, but because he understood its significance too well to approach it lightly. Wisdom often comes through experience rather than age, Helena said quietly, drawing his attention back to her. And the willingness to admit one's limitations is itself a form of wisdom. Something shifted in his expression, a softening perhaps or recognition of being understood. You are unusually perceptive, Miss Brookstone. Or merely observant, she replied. The two are often confused. The evening continued, but the quality of the conversation had changed in subtle ways Helena could not quite define. The Duke seemed more present, more engaged, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than mere politeness. He inquired about her reading habits and seemed pleased when she mentioned works of philosophy alongside novels. He asked her opinion on a recent reform proposal being debated in Parliament, and when she offered a thoughtful response, he pursued the discussion with the same seriousness he might with her father. Lady Brookstone watched these exchanges with barely concealed delight, probably already composing wedding announcements in her mind. Helena, however, remained cautious. The Duke was pleasant company, certainly more interesting than most of the gentlemen she encountered at local assemblies, but that did not mean anything significant would come of their acquaintance. He would complete his business in the county and return to his ducal responsibilities, and she would return to her comfortable existence at Brookstone Manor. As the evening drew to a close and the Duke prepared to depart, he turned to Helena with what seemed like genuine reluctance. "I wonder, Miss Brookstone, if I might impose upon your father's hospitality for another visit. I find myself curious about those agricultural improvements you mentioned, and I would value your insights on their practical application." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. Helena could feel her mother practically vibrating with excitement nearby, while her father looked pleased but somewhat confused by this development. She met the Duke's gaze directly, seeing in those grey-green eyes a question that went beyond agricultural discussion. "I am certain my father would be pleased to accommodate your interest, Your Grace," she said carefully, "and I am always happy to discuss matters of practical estate management." He smiled then, and it transformed his entire countenance from remote authority to something far more approachable. "Then I shall look forward to our next conversation, Miss Brookstone." After he departed, Lady Brookstone could barely contain her enthusiasm. "The Duke of Ashford, taking such particular notice of you, Helena. Did you see how he sought your opinion, how he lingered over his farewell? This could be the making of everything." Helena, who had learned long ago to temper her mother's expectations, simply smiled and excused herself to retire for the evening. In the privacy of her chamber, she allowed herself to examine the evening more closely. Edmund Fairley had been interesting, undeniably so. Their conversation had possessed a quality of genuine exchange rather than mere social performance, but she refused to build castles of expectation on such slender foundation. She had watched her sisters marry for love, and she was glad of their happiness. But she had also learned that her path might be different, and she had made peace with that possibility. If the Duke called again, she would enjoy his company for what it was, stimulating conversation with an intelligent man. But she would not allow hope to take root, would not permit herself to imagine futures that might never materialize. Still, as she prepared for sleep that night, Helena could not entirely suppress the small flutter of something in her chest. Not hope exactly, but perhaps a cautious curiosity about what might come next. The Duke of Ashford had seen her, truly seen her, in ways that other gentlemen had not. Whether that seeing would lead anywhere beyond polite acquaintance remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt less like resignation and more like possibility. And Helena, who had built a life on accepting what was, rather than yearning for what might be, allowed herself to acknowledge that perhaps, just perhaps, patience had virtues beyond mere endurance. The Duke called again 3 days later, arriving in the afternoon under the pretext of discussing land management with her father. But after an hour closeted in Sir William's study, he requested permission to walk in the gardens, and further requested Miss Brookstone's company as guide. Lady Brookstone practically pushed Helena out the door, her excitement barely masked by maternal propriety. The September afternoon was fine, with that particular quality of light that comes late in the season, golden and somehow wistful, as if aware of autumn's approach. Helena led the Duke through the formal gardens near the house, then along the path toward the wider grounds, where woods gave way to open fields. They walked in silence initially, the only sounds their footsteps on gravel and the distant calls of birds preparing for evening. "You must forgive my transparency," Edmund said finally, his voice carrying a note of wry amusement. "I suspect neither of us truly believes I came to discuss crop rotation." Helena appreciated his directness. "No," she agreed, "though I would happily discuss it if you wished. My father has implemented several innovations that have proven quite successful." He laughed at that, the sound warm and genuine. "Perhaps another time. For now I find myself more interested in understanding you, Miss Brookstone. You are not what I expected." "And what did you expect?" Helena asked, curious despite herself. "I'm not certain," he admitted. "But not this. Not someone who speaks her mind with such refreshing clarity, who seems entirely comfortable with who she is, without needing validation or approval." It's rare, particularly among young ladies thrust into my company by ambitious mothers. My mother is ambitious, Helena said honestly, but I am not. Whatever designs she may harbor, I assure you they are hers alone. He stopped walking then, turning to face her directly. And what are your designs, if any? It was a bold question, perhaps even improper given their brief acquaintance, but Helena found she appreciated the directness. She considered her response carefully before speaking. I have learned that designing futures is often an exercise in disappointment. I prefer to engage fully with the present and trust that the future will reveal itself in time. A philosophy born of patience or of pain? He asked gently. Both, Helena answered. I have watched my sisters marry well, watched my parents' concern for my unmarried state grow with each passing season. I could have allowed that concern to become my own, could have twisted myself into shapes meant to attract male attention. Instead, I chose to build a life worth living on my own terms. If marriage comes, it will be because someone values who I actually am, not some performance of femininity I've constructed to please others. Edmund was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had not heard before. I understand that position more than you might imagine. I have spent years being pursued, not for myself, but for my title, my wealth, my connections. Every smile directed at me, every carefully orchestrated encounter, all calculated to capture a duke rather than know a man. It has made me cautious, perhaps overly so. The famous list, Helena said, unable to suppress a slight smile. My sister mentioned it. Is it true you have specific requirements for a duchess? In a manner of speaking, he admitted, though perhaps hopes would be more accurate than requirements. I want a partner who sees beyond the duchy, someone with sufficient intelligence and strength of character to manage the responsibilities that come with my position. I want honesty rather than flattery, substance rather than performance. I want... He paused, seeming to struggle with articulation. I want what I saw in you the first evening we met. That quiet self-possession, that refusal to diminish yourself for others' comfort. Helena felt her breath catch slightly. Your Grace, we have only just met. You cannot possibly know you well enough to make such statement, he interrupted gently. Perhaps not. But I have learned to trust my observations, Miss Brookstone, and what I observe in you is precisely what I have been seeking. Someone real, someone substantial, someone who would be Duchess not because she covets the title, but because she possesses the qualities the role requires. They resumed walking, but the afternoon had taken on a different quality. Helena's mind worked quickly, parsing his words for their true meaning. He was not declaring himself, not exactly, but he was indicating interest in a manner both direct and respectful. And despite her determination not to hope, she found herself drawn to him in ways that surprised her. You said your estate is lonely, she ventured after several minutes of silence. Why is that? Edmund sighed, his expression growing more remote. Ashford House is beautiful, but vast. My parents died when I was 14, a carriage accident returning from London. I became duke overnight, barely more than a boy trying to fill my father's shoes while grieving his loss. My uncle served as regent until I came of age, handling ducal business while I attempted to complete my education. When I finally took full control at 21, I discovered I had inherited not just property and title, but a web of expectations and obligations I had not prepared for. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I managed it, learned what I needed to learn, made decisions that were required. But I did so largely alone, trusting few people because I could not easily determine who valued me versus who valued my position. The house itself became a symbol of that isolation. Grand rooms that felt empty, portraits of ancestors watching my inadequacy, spaces designed for family that contained only me. I told myself I would marry when I found someone who could transform that emptiness into home. But year after year passed without my finding such a person. Until now, Helena asked quietly, her heart beating faster despite her attempts at composure. Perhaps, Edmund replied, meeting her gaze, though I am aware of presumption in saying so. You have given me no indication you seek marriage, much less to a duke you barely know. No, Helena agreed, but neither have I closed myself to possibility. I said I do not design futures, Your Grace, but that does not mean I refuse to recognize opportunity when it presents itself. You interest me. Our conversations possess a quality I have not often experienced. Whether that interest might develop into something more, she trailed off, uncertain how to complete the thought without sounding either presumptuous or calculating. It requires time and honesty, Edmund finished for her. No performances, no elaborate courtship rituals designed to obscure rather than reveal character. Simply two people attempting to determine if they might suit one another for a lifetime of partnership. Yes, Helena said, relief flooding through her. Exactly that. They returned to the house as afternoon faded toward evening, and Edmund took his leave with a promise to call again soon. Over the following weeks, he kept that promise with remarkable consistency. He visited Brookstone Manor 3 times weekly, always properly chaperoned, always with ostensible reason related to property matters or political discussion with her father. But everyone understood the true purpose of these visits. Edmund Fairley was courting Helena Brookstone, though in a manner unlike any courtship the county had witnessed. There were no extravagant gifts, no flowery declarations, no dramatic gestures designed to sweep Helena off her feet. Instead, Edmund offered something far more valuable, his time, his attention, and his genuine self. They walked together in the gardens, discussing everything from philosophy to practical estate management. They read and analyzed poetry together in the drawing room, debating interpretations with passionate intellectual engagement. They played chess in her father's study, discovering they were evenly matched in both skill and strategic thinking. Helena learned that beneath Edmund's ducal formality lived a man of surprising warmth and dry humor. He told stories of his parliamentary work with self-deprecating wit, made observations about society's absurdities that matched her own, and demonstrated a capacity for vulnerable honesty that few people probably witnessed. He spoke of his loneliness without self-pity, acknowledged his mistakes without defensive rationalization, and revealed himself gradually as someone who had spent years building walls against exploitation that also kept out genuine connection. Edmund, in turn, discovered depths in Helena that delighted him. Her intelligence was not merely decorative but sharply analytical. Her composure came not from coldness, but from hard-won self-knowledge. Her patience was not passivity, but rather strength refined through experience. She challenged his assumptions, questioned his logic, and refused to defer to his opinions simply because he was a duke. Yet she did so with kindness, never attempting to diminish him even as she held her ground in disagreement. "You make me better," he told her one afternoon after a particularly spirited debate about parliamentary reform. "You push me to examine my positions rather than simply holding them by default. I have not had that in my life before. Someone who respects me enough to disagree with me." "Disagreement is not disrespect," Helena replied, "though many seem to confuse the two. I would not argue with you if I did not value your intelligence enough to believe you can defend your positions or gracefully acknowledge when they need revision." The county watched this unusual courtship with fascinated speculation. Some whispered that the Duke was too serious, too controlled, that surely Helena deserved more passion and romance. Others suggested Helena was calculating, angling for a duchess's coronet through strategic intelligence rather than feminine wiles. Lady Brookstone ignored all such gossip, radiating quiet satisfaction that her youngest daughter had captured the attention of the most eligible bachelor in England. But Sir William, who understood his daughter better than most, felt both pride and concern. One evening after Edmund had departed following dinner, he sought Helena out in the library where she sat reading by lamplight. "Are you happy, my dear?" he asked without preamble, settling into the chair across from her. Helena marked her place in the book and considered the question seriously. "I am content," she said finally. "Edmund is excellent company, and I value our conversations. But happy? That seems premature. We are still learning each other." "Do you love him?" Sir William pressed, his expression troubled. "Or are you drawn to the security and position he offers?" "I am not drawn to his position," Helena said firmly. You know me better than that, father. If anything, the duchy is intimidating rather than attractive. But Edmund himself? She paused, examining her feelings with characteristic honesty. I find myself caring for him more each time we meet. Whether that care is developing into love, I cannot yet say, but I believe it might, given time. And does he love you? Her father asked gently. I think he might be beginning to, Helena replied, though he is too cautious to declare himself prematurely. He has been hurt by calculation and performance. I think he needs to be certain that what develops between us is genuine before he allows himself to fully feel it. Sir William nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom in such caution even as he worried for his daughter's heart. Just promise me, Helena, that you will not settle for something less than you deserve, simply because you have waited longer than your sisters. Better to remain unmarried than to enter into a union lacking true feeling. I promise, Helena said, reaching across to squeeze her father's hand. I will not marry without genuine affection and respect. Edmund has not proposed, and even if he does, I will only accept if I can do so with wholehearted conviction, rather than mere practical acceptance. The autumn deepened toward winter, and still the careful courtship continued. Edmund had business that occasionally required his presence in London or at his estate in Derbyshire, but he always returned to the county within days, as if drawn back by some force he could not entirely resist. On one such return visit, he brought Helena a gift, not jewelry or flowers, but a first edition of a philosophy text she had mentioned wanting to read. The thoughtfulness of it touched her more than any expensive bauble could have. You remembered, she said, running her fingers over the leather binding with genuine pleasure. I remember everything you tell me, Edmund replied simply. Every preference, every opinion, every small detail you share. They matter to me because you matter to me. It was the closest he had come to a declaration, and Helena felt her careful composure waver. Edmund, she said softly, using his given name for the first time without his title, I want you to know that I see you. Not the Duke of Ashford, not the position or the property, but the man behind all of that, and what I see I very much like. His expression transformed, something fierce and vulnerable crossing his features simultaneously. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and slightly trembling. Helena, he said, his voice rough with emotion barely contained, I have been afraid to hope. Afraid that what I feel might be my own desperation, making me imagine connection where none truly exists. But when you look at me like that, when you speak with such clarity, I cannot help but believe this might be real. It is real, Helena whispered, her own voice unsteady. At least for me it is. Whether it is enough for a lifetime, whether we can build something lasting from this beginning, those questions require answering. But the feeling itself is genuine. I promise you that. They stood there in the library, hands clasped, something transforming between them from cautious exploration to acknowledged feeling. It was not the passionate declaration of romantic novels, not the sweep-you-off-your-feet moment Helena's sisters had experienced, but it was theirs, built on foundation of honesty and growing trust that felt somehow more substantial than fireworks and dramatic gestures. The following weeks brought subtle changes to their interactions. The conversations remained as intellectually engaging, but underneath them ran a current of warmth that had not been present before. Edmund began seeking opportunities for small touches, a hand at her elbow while walking, fingers brushing as they turned pages of a book together, shoulders touching as they sat side by side on a garden bench. Helena found herself watching for his arrival with anticipation rather than mere contentment, discovered she thought of him during the hours they were apart in ways that made her smile. Christmas approached, and with it came invitations from all three of Helena's married sisters for holiday visits. Each wanted their parents and Helena to spend the season with them, to meet the growing collection of nieces and nephews, to celebrate family togetherness in their respective new homes. The invitations created a logistical challenge, requiring careful negotiation to apportion time among three households while not appearing to favor one daughter over another. Edmund listened to Helena's description of this social juggling with amusement. "And where does that leave you during the holidays?" he asked. Shuttling between houses like a traveling performer? More or less, Helena admitted with a laugh. Though I confess I rather enjoy it. I love my sisters and their children, and seeing them happy in their homes brings me genuine joy. But yes, it will be exhausting. What if, Edmund said slowly, as if the thought were just forming, you had an alternative, a prior commitment that would excuse you from at least part of this traveling circus? Helena's heart began beating faster. What manner of commitment? Ashford House traditionally hosts a house party between Christmas and New Year, Edmund said, his eyes on her face. I had not planned to do so this year, but I find myself wanting to change that. Would you consider attending? Your parents would of course be invited as well, properly chaperoned, a small gathering of people whose company I genuinely value rather than obligatory social performance. It was a significant invitation, tantamount to a public declaration of serious courtship. Everyone who mattered would know that the Duke of Ashford had invited Miss Helena Brookstone to his estate. Speculation would run rampant, assumptions would be made, and expectations would crystallize around their relationship. Helena understood all of this implicitly, recognized that accepting meant stepping into a spotlight she had largely avoided throughout her life. But she also recognized opportunity, the chance to see Edmund in his own environment, to understand the loneliness he had described, to evaluate whether she could indeed transform his house into a home. And perhaps more importantly, to give him similar opportunity to see her in different context, to observe how she managed in society, to confirm that his feelings were not merely artifact of their current circumstances. I would be honored to attend, Helena said carefully, with my parents' permission naturally, but Edmund, you should know that accepting this invitation is essentially accepting that the world will consider us all but formally engaged. Are you certain you want that pressure? I am certain I want you there, he replied with unusual directness. Whatever conclusions society draws from that fact, we will manage together. Unless, he added with slight hesitation, you are uncomfortable with such speculation? No, Helena said honestly. I stopped caring what society thought of me years ago, but I want to ensure you understand the implications. You have been the most sought-after bachelor in England. By singling me out so obviously, you close doors to other options. I would not want you to feel trapped by social expectation before you are certain of your feelings. Edmund took both her hands in his, a gesture bolder than any he had previously attempted. Helena, listen to me carefully. I have spent years avoiding precisely this moment because I could not find someone worth the risk of vulnerability. But I have found that person in you. When I imagine Ashford House no longer lonely, it is your presence I envision filling those empty rooms. When I think of my future, you are in it. I am not trapped by social expectation. I am emboldened by growing certainty that what I feel for you will only deepen with time. It was not a formal proposal, not quite, but it was close enough that Helena felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, maintaining the composure that had become her armor against the world, but she could not stop the smile that transformed her face. Then yes, she said softly. Yes, I will come to Ashford House, and we will see where this journey takes us. Edmund exhaled as if he had been holding his breath, and his answering smile was radiant. Then I shall spend the next few weeks ensuring everything is perfect for your arrival. Though I confess perfection seems less important than it once did. You have taught me that authenticity matters more than flawless performance. The invitation to Ashford House set off a flurry of activity at Brookstone Manor. Lady Brookstone practically glowed with triumph, already imagining her daughter as a duchess. Sir William remained more cautious, but could not hide his pleasure at seeing Helena genuinely happy. Preparations began for the journey to Derbyshire. Gowns to be selected and packed, arrangements to be made with the sisters regarding altered holiday plans, speculation to be managed about what this invitation truly meant. Helena herself felt a strange mixture of excitement and calm. She was stepping into unknown territory, accepting a path she had long since stopped expecting to walk. But she did so with open eyes and honest heart, without illusions about instant transformation or guaranteed outcomes. Edmund Fairley had seen her truly, had chosen her, not despite who she was, but because of it. And she had done the same for him, seeing past the title to the lonely man seeking genuine connection. Whether that mutual seeing would be enough to build a marriage remained to be determined. But for the first time since watching her sisters marry one by one, Helena allowed herself to hope that patience might indeed lead somewhere worth going. She had not sought the Duke's attention, had not competed for his favor, had not twisted herself into shapes meant to attract him. She had simply been herself, and somehow, miraculously, that had been exactly what he wanted. As December progressed toward their departure for Ashford House, Helena found herself returning again and again to Edmund's words. Authenticity matters more than flawless performance. It was a philosophy she had lived by necessity, having learned years ago that she could not successfully pretend to be something she was not. But to hear it articulated and valued by someone else, particularly by someone of Edmund's status and experience, felt like validation she had not realized she needed. The world had overlooked her while celebrating her sisters. Society had written her off as too serious, too intelligent, too comfortable in her own skin to properly pursue a husband. But Edmund had not overlooked her. He had seen precisely those qualities society found off-putting and recognized them as valuable. In doing so, he had given Helena something precious, confirmation that waiting for genuine connection rather than settling for available option had been the right choice all along. And so as snow began dusting the grounds of Brookstone Manor and Christmas approached, Helena prepared for a journey that might change her life. Not with desperate hope or anxious expectation, but with the same quiet dignity she brought to all things, open to possibility while remaining firmly grounded in who she was. She had watched her sisters marry lords one by one and had borne the weight of unspoken questions about her own future with patience and grace. But now perhaps it was her turn. Not to marry a lord in a flurry of conventional romance, but to potentially become duchess to a man who valued her mind as much as any superficial attribute, who sought partnership rather than ornament, who offered something deeper and more lasting than passionate declarations that might fade with familiarity. The Duke of Ashford had not swooped in to rescue Helena from spinsterhood. Instead, he had recognized in her a kindred spirit, someone else who refused to compromise authentic self for social acceptance, someone who understood that genuine connection required time and honesty, someone patient enough to wait for something real rather than seize something merely available. And Helena, who had built a life worth living on her own terms, now faced the possibility of sharing that life with someone who appreciated rather than merely tolerated her independence. Whether they would ultimately suit each other for the profound commitment of marriage remained uncertain. But the journey toward that answer promised to be worth taking, and Helena Brookstone, overlooked youngest daughter turned Duchess-in-waiting, walked toward it with characteristic grace and quiet strength that had always defined her. The journey to Derbyshire took 2 days, with an overnight stop at a coaching inn halfway between Brookstone Manor and Ashford House. Lady Brookstone spent most of the travel time offering advice Helena had not requested, how to comport herself among ducal company, which topics to avoid in mixed conversation, the importance of appearing gracious rather than intellectual. Helena listened with patient tolerance, understanding her mother's anxiety even if she had no intention of modifying her behavior to match these suggestions. Sir William, observing his daughter's composure, felt both pride and lingering concern. He had watched Helena transform over the years from a hopeful young girl into a woman of remarkable self-possession, and he understood that transformation had not come without cost. Rejection, even silent and unspoken, leaves marks on the soul. That Helena had transmuted disappointment into dignity spoke to her strength, but Sir William worried that she might have built walls so sturdy that genuine feeling could no longer penetrate them. "You seem remarkably calm," he remarked to Helena during a quiet moment at the inn while his wife rested before dinner. "Are you not anxious about meeting the Duke's friends and associates?" Helena considered the question while gazing out the window at winter countryside rendered beautiful by frost. "I am curious," she admitted, "but anxiety seems wasted energy. Either they will accept me or they will not. Edmund's opinion is the only one that truly matters, and I believe we understand each other well enough now that his regard is secure." "And your regard for him?" Sir William pressed gently. "Is that equally secure?" It grows daily, Helena replied honestly. I cannot yet say I love him with the certainty my sisters claimed when they married, but I feel deep affection, respect, and a sense of rightness when we are together. Perhaps love comes differently for different people. Perhaps what I feel is a quieter version that will prove more enduring, precisely because it developed gradually, rather than erupting all at once. Sir William nodded, reassured somewhat by her thoughtfulness. Just remember, my dear, that you need not accept him if doubt remains. You have built a good life at Brookstone Manor. Do not abandon it for position if genuine feeling is absent. I promise, Helena said, squeezing her father's hand. I am old enough and wise enough to know my own heart. I will not marry without genuine conviction that it is right. They arrived at Ashford House late the following afternoon, as winter twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and grey. The estate was even more magnificent than descriptions had suggested, a sprawling manor house of honey-coloured stone, surrounded by grounds that stretched toward distant hills. Even in winter's dormancy, the landscaping revealed meticulous attention and substantial resources. This was not merely wealth, but generational accumulation of property and prestige. Helena felt her first flutter of genuine nervousness as their carriage rolled up the long drive. She would be evaluated here, measured against expectations and standards she could not fully anticipate. Society would be watching to determine if the youngest Brookstone daughter was suitable Duchess material, if Edmund's unusual choice reflected wisdom or eccentric poor judgment. But then Edmund appeared at the entrance to greet them personally, rather than waiting inside with formal distance, and Helena's anxiety subsided. He looked distinguished in evening attire, his dark hair slightly wind-blown from standing outside, his expression transforming from careful composure to genuine warmth as his gaze found Helena's. "You came," he said simply, as if there had been doubt. "I said I would," Helena replied with slight smile. "I do not make promises lightly." "No," Edmund agreed, stepping forward to hand her down from the carriage himself, rather than leaving the task to servants. "That is one of many things I admire about you." His fingers lingered on hers a moment longer than propriety strictly required, a small gesture that nevertheless conveyed volumes about his relief at her arrival. The house party had not yet begun. Other guests would arrive tomorrow, so this evening would belong to her family and Edmund, an opportunity to acclimate before facing broader society's scrutiny. Ashford House's interior matched its external grandeur. High ceilings, elaborate plasterwork, paintings that spoke of centuries of collected taste and wealth. But Edmund's description of loneliness proved accurate. Despite its beauty, the house felt somehow hollow, as if waiting to be truly inhabited rather than merely occupied. Rooms designed for gatherings stood too quiet, spaces meant for family echoing with absence. Helena understood immediately what Edmund had tried to convey. This was not a home, but a monument to ducal heritage, impressive but ultimately cold. Transforming it into something warmer would require more than redecorating. It would demand the kind of genuine life that came from people who loved each other, filling these spaces with authentic presence. "Your home is beautiful," she said carefully as Edmund gave them a brief tour before they retired to dress for dinner. "But lonely," he finished for her. "As I warned, I have often thought it would be kinder to leave it closed, to live in the much smaller property I maintain in London. But duty requires presence here, attention to the land and tenants who depend on ducal management. So I endure the emptiness and try not to dwell on what this house might be with proper family to fill it." "Family can be created," Helena said softly. "It need not only be inherited." Edmund's expression grew intensely focused on her face. "Yes," he said simply. "That is exactly what I hope to discover." Dinner that evening was an intimate affair, just the four of them in a dining room that could have easily accommodated 30. Lady Brookstone maintained a flow of cheerful conversation, clearly delighted by every detail of the house and eager to see Helena established as its mistress. Sir William proved more subdued, observing the interaction between his daughter and the Duke with paternal scrutiny that Edmund seemed to sense and respect. "Your tenants are well housed," Sir William remarked, having noticed several cottages during their arrival. "That speaks well of your stewardship." "I learned early that a duke's responsibility extends beyond his own comfort," Edmund replied. "My uncle taught me that the title means nothing if those dependent upon it suffer neglect. I cannot claim perfection in management, but I do attempt conscientiousness." "Attempting conscientiousness is itself a form of success," Helena interjected. "Perfection is an impossible standard that serves mainly to paralyze action. Better to act with good intention and adjust course as needed than to wait for certainty that never arrives." Edmund's expression warmed with appreciation for her insight. "You have a gift for articulating truths I sense but cannot quite capture in words. It is one of many reasons I find your company so valuable." The evening progressed with comfortable conversation, and by the time they retired for the night, Helena felt some of her nervousness had been justified but ultimately manageable. Ashford House was intimidating in its scale and grandeur, but Edmund's genuine warmth provided anchor against that intimidation. She could envision herself here, could imagine transforming these formal spaces into something more welcoming, though the magnitude of such undertaking was sobering. Her assigned chamber was beautiful, a spacious room with windows overlooking the grounds, furnished with obvious care for guest comfort. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, and her belongings had been unpacked with efficient discretion. Yet as Helena prepared for bed, she found herself drawn to the window, looking out at moonlight on winter landscape and thinking about the path that had brought her here. She had spent years reconciling herself to spinsterhood, building a life that did not depend on male validation or marital status for meaning. That independence had been hard-won, forged through quiet determination and refusal to diminish herself for others' comfort. Now she stood on the precipice of potentially surrendering that independence, joining her life to someone else's in the profound intimacy marriage required. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt cautious optimism. Edmund was not asking her to become someone different. He valued her precisely for the qualities that had kept other suitors at distance. If she married him, it would not be surrender but rather expansion, taking the life she had built alone and sharing it with someone who appreciated rather than merely tolerated her authentic self. The following day brought the arrival of other house party guests. Edmund had kept his promise about intimate gathering, only 8 additional people beyond Helena's family. There were Lord and Lady Pembridge, Caroline's in-laws, whom Helena knew slightly from previous encounters. Sir James Whitmore, a parliamentary colleague of both Edmund's and her father's. The Honourable Thomas Ashworth and his sister, Miss Julia Ashworth, distant cousins of Edmund's who served as unofficial family when he required such presence. And finally, the Dowager Duchess of Somerton, an elderly woman of formidable reputation who had been friend to Edmund's late mother. Helena understood immediately that this carefully curated guest list served dual purposes. Edmund wanted people whose company he genuinely valued, rather than obligatory social performances. But he also wanted witnesses, respected members of society, who could observe their interaction and either validate his choice or raise concerns if they perceived fundamental unsuitability. The realization was both touching and slightly intimidating. Edmund took this seriously enough to subject their relationship to informed scrutiny, rather than simply following his own inclination without external input. It spoke to his conscientiousness, his awareness that a duke's marriage had implications beyond personal happiness, but it also meant Helena would spend the next several days essentially on trial, being evaluated for qualities she might or might not possess. She met the assembled guests that afternoon in the drawing room, noting how they studied her with varying degrees of curiosity. Lady Pembridge was warm and welcoming, having known Helena for years through the family connection. Sir James Whitmore proved cordial but reserved, clearly waiting to form his own opinion, rather than accepting anyone else's assessment. The Ashworth siblings were younger, closer to Helena's age, and seemed genuinely pleased that Edmund had finally singled someone out for particular attention. But it was the Dowager Duchess who commanded attention and inspired the most anxiety. She was perhaps 70, elegantly dressed in deep purple silk that matched her imperious bearing. Her eyes were sharp and assessing as they swept over Helena, missing nothing. Not the quality of her gown, nor her posture, nor the way she met that scrutiny without flinching. So, you are the young woman who has captured Ashford's interest, the Dowager said without preamble, her tone revealing nothing of her opinion. He speaks very highly of your character and intelligence. Your Grace is kind to say so, Helena replied with carefully calibrated courtesy, respectful without being obsequious. The Duke has been most generous in his attentions. Generosity has nothing to do with it, the Dowager said tartly. Ashford does nothing from mere kindness. If he has chosen to pursue you, it is because he perceives qualities he values. The question is whether those qualities will prove sufficient for the demands of his position. It was a challenge, clearly intended to test Helena's composure under direct examination. She could feel everyone in the room watching, waiting to see how she would respond to such bluntness. Lady Brookstone looked appalled, Sir William tense, but Edmund's expression showed only calm interest, as if curious how Helena would handle this confrontation. "I cannot speak to sufficiency, Your Grace," Helena said evenly. "That determination belongs to the Duke, not to me. What I can say is that I do not seek his position. I value the man himself. Whether that value is reciprocated adequately to justify marriage remains to be discovered. We are both intelligent enough to recognize that affection alone does not guarantee successful partnership." The Dowager's lips twitched in what might have been approval. "A diplomatic answer, but tell me, Miss Brookstone, what would you change about Ashford House if you became its mistress?" Helena recognized the trap in the question. Suggesting changes implied criticism of current management, but claiming she would change nothing suggested either dishonesty or lack of vision. She chose honesty over diplomacy. "I would make it less formal," she said directly. "The house is beautiful, but feels more like museum than home. I would want spaces where people could gather comfortably without constant awareness of valuable surroundings. I would want sounds of life, music, conversation, perhaps eventually children, filling rooms that currently echo with emptiness. I would want the tenants to feel welcomed rather than tolerated. But these are merely instincts, Your Grace. Without living here, without understanding the demands and constraints of managing such property, I cannot make specific pronouncements about changes I would implement." "An honest answer," the Dowager conceded, "and a wise one. Too many young women imagine themselves transforming their husbands' houses without comprehending the practical limitations or the presumption in attempting wholesale changes. Your restraint speaks well of your judgment." The tension in the room eased somewhat, and conversation moved to less contentious topics. But Helena understood she had passed the first test, whatever it had been. The Dowager Duchess was formidable, and earning even grudging approval from her was significant. Edmund sought Helena out later that afternoon, when she had retreated to the conservatory for a moment of solitude. The glass-enclosed space was filled with winter-dormant plants and provided views of the grounds while maintaining warmth. She stood looking out at formal gardens covered in frost, thinking about the Dowager's questions and her own responses. "You handled the Dowager beautifully," Edmund said without preamble as he joined her. "She has a gift for intimidation that makes most people either obsequious or defensive. You managed neither." "I simply answered honestly," Helena said, "though I confess I was tempted toward diplomacy." "I am glad you resisted the temptation," Edmund replied. "She would have seen through polite evasion and respected you less for attempting it. The Dowager values directness above almost all other qualities. My mother was her dearest friend, and they bonded over mutual refusal to tolerate social pretense." He moved closer, close enough that Helena could feel warmth from his body in the cool air of the conservatory. "I should apologize for subjecting you to such scrutiny. It was not fair to place you in that position without warning." "You need not apologize," Helena said, turning to face him. "I understand why you did it. A duke cannot marry solely for personal preference. Your choice has implications for your estate, your tenants, your position in society. Better to discover now if I lack qualities necessary for the role than to proceed blindly and face disappointment later." "You could never disappoint me," Edmund said with sudden intensity. "You are everything I have sought and more than I dared hope to find. But you are right that others' perspectives matter, not because they determine my choice, but because I want you to have support and acceptance rather than facing isolation or subtle rejection from people whose regard matters to you. Helena felt something shift in her chest, a warmth spreading that had nothing to do with the conservatory's temperature. "That is thoughtful," she said softly. Most men would simply expect their wives to adapt to existing social structures without concern for comfort or acceptance. "I am not most men," Edmund replied, "and you are not most women, which is precisely why I believe we might suit one another extraordinarily well." He reached for her hand, and Helena allowed him to take it, feeling the now familiar warmth of his touch. They stood together in the quiet conservatory, connected by clasped hands and growing certainty, while winter afternoon light faded toward evening outside the glass walls. "Are you frightened?" Edmund asked after a long moment of comfortable silence. "Sometimes," Helena admitted. "The magnitude of what becoming Duchess would entail is sobering. But I'm more curious than frightened. I want to discover if what we feel now will deepen, or whether it is merely artifact of circumstance and novelty. I want to know if I can truly make this house feel like home rather than monument. I want to understand whether I possess the strength to meet the demands this position would require. And if you discover you do not," Edmund pressed gently, "then I will tell you honestly rather than proceeding into marriage that would make us both miserable," Helena said firmly. "I will not trap you with expectations or pretense. If doubt remains when you propose, and I assume you will propose given the current trajectory, I will acknowledge that doubt rather than accepting from mere social pressure or fear of refusing a duke." Edmund laughed at that, the sound warm and genuine. "You have such refreshing faith in my intentions. Yes, I plan to propose, but not yet, not until we are both certain. This house party serves partly as test, but also as opportunity for us to see each other in different contexts, to confirm that what we feel is substantial enough to support lifelong commitment." "Then we are agreed," Helena said, squeezing his hand. "We proceed with honesty and without rushing toward conclusion simply because others expect it." The evening brought formal dinner with all guests assembled, and Helena found herself seated between Sir James Whitmore and Thomas Ashworth. The arrangement seemed deliberate, Edmund testing how she managed conversation with men of different temperaments and interests. Sir James proved initially reserved, but gradually warmed as Helena demonstrated genuine knowledge of parliamentary matters beyond what most women of her class possessed. Thomas Ashworth was easier company, charming and witty, though Helena sensed keen intelligence beneath his affable manner. "Edmund seems different with you," Thomas remarked during a lull in general conversation. "More relaxed, more himself rather than Ducal Ashford performing his role. That is no small accomplishment." "Perhaps he was ready to relax and simply needed occasion to do so," Helena suggested, unwilling to claim credit for Edmund's emotional state. "Perhaps," Thomas agreed, "but I have watched various women attempt to breach his reserve for years now. None succeeded until you. There is something about your presence that allows him to set down the weight of his position, at least temporarily. That is valuable beyond measure." Helena absorbed this observation, understanding it as both compliment and subtle warning. If she became Edmund's Duchess, she would carry responsibility for providing him sanctuary from the constant demands of his position. That was a different kind of pressure than she had previously considered, not just managing a household or navigating society, but serving as emotional anchor for someone carrying burdens she could barely imagine. After dinner, the ladies retired to the drawing room while the gentlemen remained for port and masculine conversation. The Dowager Duchess took the opportunity to continue her assessment of Helena, though with slightly less aggressive questioning than earlier. "Tell me about your sisters," she commanded. "Ashford mentioned they all married before you. Was that difficult?" Helena appreciated the directness, even as she recognized the complexity of the question. "It was instructive," she said after considering her response. "I watched each sister find happiness with men who suited them, and I was genuinely glad of their contentment. But yes, there were moments of wondering why similar fortune eluded me, what I might lack that they possessed." "And your conclusion?" the Dowager pressed. "That I did not lack anything essential," Helena replied. "Rather, I possessed qualities that took longer to be properly appreciated. I am not the easy choice, the comfortable option. I require more effort to know, more patience to understand. Most men were not willing to invest that effort, but the Duke is not most men." "No," the Dowager agreed. "He is not. His parents' early death forced maturity upon him before he was ready. He learned to be cautious, to evaluate, to look beneath surfaces because surface charm had so often masked ulterior motives. You interest him precisely because you do not perform or dissemble. What he sees is what exists, and he finds what exists valuable." It was the closest thing to approval the Dowager had offered, and Helena felt some of her tension ease. "I hope I can live up to whatever expectations that creates," she said honestly. "Expectations are traps," the Dowager said tartly. "The moment you start trying to meet them, you stop being the person who interested him initially. Simply continue being yourself, honest, intelligent, composed. That will prove sufficient, if anything will." The gentleman rejoined them shortly after, and the evening concluded with music. Miss Julia Ashworth played pianoforte with considerable skill, and several guests sang. Edmund, to Helena's surprise, possessed a pleasant baritone that he employed in a duet with his cousin. Watching him in this relaxed social setting, Helena saw glimpses of the man he might have become without the early burden of his title. Easier in his manner, quicker to laugh, more openly affectionate with people he trusted. She wanted to know that version of Edmund better, wanted to help him reclaim aspects of himself that duty and loss had compressed. But she also understood such transformation required time and could not be forced. If they married, it would be a gradual process of mutual discovery and adjustment, not instant magical change. The following days settled into pleasant rhythm. Mornings brought opportunities for riding or walking, though winter weather limited extensive outdoor activity. Helena discovered she and Edmund rode with similar styles, competent and confident without being reckless. They explored estate paths together, sometimes alone with a groom following at discreet distance, sometimes with other guests joining them. Afternoons featured various activities: reading, cards, conversations in the library, or drawing room. Helena found herself genuinely enjoying most of the assembled company. Lady Pembridge proved warm and encouraging, clearly hoping for an alliance between their families. Sir James Whitmore gradually revealed dry wit beneath his reserved exterior. The Ashworth siblings treated Helena as if she were already family, with the comfortable teasing that suggested acceptance. Only the Dowager remained somewhat inscrutable, though Helena sensed her initial hostility had softened into grudging respect. The older woman observed everything, missing nothing, and occasionally offered tart observations that were nonetheless perceptive. Helena found herself valuing the Dowager's opinion precisely because it was earned rather than automatically given. Evenings brought formal dinners followed by entertainment, more music, occasional theatrical readings, games that ranged from intellectual to silly. Helena discovered Edmund possessed unexpected talent for charades, throwing himself into absurd pantomimes with commitment that made everyone laugh. Seeing him playful and unself-conscious was revelation, confirming that beneath the ducal dignity lived capacity for genuine joy if given appropriate environment. On the third night of the house party, Edmund invited Helena to view his library, a magnificent room occupying an entire wing of the house, filled floor to ceiling with volumes collected over generations. They wandered among the shelves with only a single lamp for illumination, discussing favorite authors and philosophical questions the books inspired. "This is where I spent most of my youth," Edmund told her, trailing fingers along leather spines with obvious affection. "After my parents died, I retreated here. Books became my companions, my teachers, my escape from responsibilities I was not ready to shoulder. I think I know this room better than any other space in the house." "It is beautiful," Helena said sincerely, observing the careful organization, the obvious care in maintaining these volumes. "Though I confess your collection is overwhelming, I could spend years here and not exhaust the possibilities." "Then you understand why I am never lonely in this room," Edmund said. "Only in the others, where I am surrounded by reminders of family I lost and family I have not yet created." They had reached a secluded corner of the library, away from the door and any possibility of observation. Edmund turned to face Helena fully, his expression more vulnerable than she had yet witnessed. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I have not shared with anyone else." Helena waited, sensing the importance of this moment, giving him space to find his words. "I told you my parents died when I was 14, Edmund continued, his voice low and rough. "What I did not tell you was that I was supposed to be in that carriage with them. I had planned to accompany them to London, but the night before departure I had a childish tantrum about something trivial, I cannot even remember what, and declared I would not go. My mother was disappointed, but my father indulged my sulking. They left without me." He paused, and Helena could see the weight of old grief and guilt in his features. "The carriage accident that killed them happened because a wheel broke on rough road. If I had been with them, adding my weight to the carriage, perhaps the wheel would have broken earlier on better road, or perhaps it would not have broken at all, or perhaps I would have died alongside them. But I was not there, and they died while I remained at Ashford House nursing adolescent wounded pride over some forgettable grievance." Helena's heart ached for the boy he had been, for the man who still carried that impossible guilt. "Edmund," she said gently, "you were a child. You cannot hold yourself responsible for their deaths simply because you were not there to share their fate." "Logically, I know that," Edmund said. "But guilt does not always respond to logic. I have spent years telling myself I could not have prevented the accident, that my presence would likely have changed nothing. But the doubt remains. If I had been less selfish, less childish, if I had gone with them as planned, might they still be alive? Or you might be dead as well," Helena pointed out softly. "And England would have lost a conscientious duke who genuinely cares about the welfare of those dependent upon him. Your survival was not punishment, Edmund. It was chance, accident, the randomness of fate that affects us all." "I know," he whispered, "but knowing does not always mean feeling. The loneliness I experience in this house is not just absence of company. It is weighted with awareness that my family should still be here, that I am alone because of decisions made decades ago that I somehow feel responsible for, despite their being utterly beyond my control." Helena reached for his hand, holding it firmly. "Then we must create new associations," she said with quiet conviction. "Not to erase your parents' memory, but to add new memories that do not carry the same burden. You deserve to fill this house with life and love, not haunted by tragedy. You deserve to move forward without constantly looking back at that single moment of adolescent rebellion, as if it defines everything that followed." Edmund pulled her closer, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face, see the shimmer of unshed tears in his eyes. "Do you understand now why I have been so cautious about marriage? I could not bear to create family only to lose it again. I could not risk loving someone, creating children, building the life my parents planned, only to have it destroyed by more random cruelty of fate. It has been easier to remain alone than to risk that kind of loss again. But loneliness is its own kind of loss," Helena said gently. "You have been losing life year after year by refusing to risk living it fully. Yes, loving people makes us vulnerable to grief, but the alternative is existing without ever truly living, and that seems far more tragic to me." Edmund's control broke then, and he gathered Helena into his arms with desperate intensity, holding her as if she might anchor him against old sorrows and persistent fears. Helena embraced him in return, offering comfort through simple presence, understanding that words could only accomplish so much in the face of grief this deep and long-standing. They stood together in the dim library for long minutes, surrounded by generations of collected knowledge and wisdom that somehow had not prevented a 14-year-old boy from carrying guilt for his parents' deaths into adulthood. Helena stroked Edmund's back soothingly, letting him take what comfort he needed without demanding explanations or composure. When he finally pulled back slightly, his eyes were red, but his expression was lighter, as if releasing the confession had lifted some of its weight. "I am sorry," he said roughly. "That was not how I intended this evening to proceed." "Do not apologize for being human," Helena replied firmly. "You have carried this alone for too long. If nothing else comes from our acquaintance, at least you have shared this burden with someone who will not use it against you, or judge you for feeling what any child would feel in similar circumstances. "You are extraordinary," Edmund said, his voice filled with wonder. "I reveal my deepest weakness, the shame I have carried for 18 years, and you simply accept it without judgment or diminishment. How did I find you, Helena? How did I get so fortunate after convincing myself I would never risk connection again?" "Perhaps we found each other," Helena suggested. "Perhaps we both needed to become who we are, you cautious from loss, me patient from apparent rejection, before we could recognize the value of what we might create together." Edmund cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the intensity of his gaze. "I am going to kiss you," he said, not asking permission but rather giving her opportunity to refuse. Helena's heart began racing, but she met his eyes steadily. "Yes," she said simply. His lips met hers with tender care, as if she were precious and fragile despite her demonstrated strength. The kiss was chaste by most standards, closed mouth and brief, but it carried profound meaning nonetheless. It was Edmund's vulnerability meeting Helena's acceptance, loneliness finding connection, caution finally taking risk. When they separated, both were breathing slightly faster, the air between them charged with newly acknowledged feeling. "I love you," Edmund said quietly, the words sounding as if pulled from somewhere deep within him. "I did not plan to say that yet, but it is true. I love you, Helena Brookstone, and I want to marry you if you will have me." Helena felt tears prick her eyes even as she smiled. "I love you too," she replied, the truth of it settling into her bones as she spoke. "I did not expect to, did not seek it, but somehow it happened anyway. Yes, Edmund. Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her again, less careful this time, with joy and relief and desire, carefully restrained by propriety and circumstances. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling, the library's shadows pushed back by the warmth they had created together. "We should return to the others before someone comes searching," Edmund said reluctantly. "But tomorrow, with your father's permission, I will make this formally official. We can announce the engagement at dinner and begin planning properly." "Yes," Helena agreed, "though I suspect most of your guests have already concluded the outcome. We have not been particularly subtle about our regard for each other." "No," Edmund said with a laugh, "I suppose we have not. But there is satisfaction in making it official, in claiming publicly what I have felt privately for weeks now." They returned to the drawing room separately, maintaining some semblance of propriety, but Helena suspected everyone could read the truth in their expressions. The Dowager Duchess caught her eye and gave a single nod of approval, confirming that indeed their intentions had been transparent to careful observers. The rest of the evening passed in pleasant haze for Helena. She participated in conversations, laughed at jokes, responded to questions, but part of her awareness remained focused on Edmund across the room, the man she loved, the man she would marry, the Duke who had looked beneath surface and found her worth claiming. That night, alone in her chamber, Helena allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had transpired. She was going to be a duchess, would take on responsibilities and scrutiny beyond anything she had experienced, but more importantly, she was going to marry a man who loved her for precisely who she was, who valued her intelligence and honesty, who sought partnership rather than ornament. She thought of her sisters, all happily married, and felt only joy at joining their ranks. The path had been different for her, longer, lonelier in some ways, requiring more patience and faith than she had known she possessed. But perhaps those very qualities made her suitable for Edmund, who needed someone capable of understanding his own long journey toward emotional availability. Helena had not been overlooked by fate, as the world had seemed to believe. She had simply been waiting for someone who could appreciate what others had failed to recognize. And now that someone had found her, claimed her, loved her with a depth that would have been impossible without the time they had taken to truly know one another, tomorrow would bring formal proposal and official announcement. But tonight, Helena simply rested in the quiet certainty that she had made the right choice, that the years of patient waiting had led exactly where they needed to lead. The Duke of Ashford loved her. And Helena Brookstone, youngest sister, overlooked daughter, woman of quiet strength and dignity, loved him in return. It was enough. It was everything. Part 3 morning brought fresh snowfall that transformed Ashford House's grounds into a winter wonderland of pristine white. Helena woke to find the world outside her window hushed and beautiful, as if nature itself was celebrating the new understanding between her and Edmund. She dressed carefully for breakfast, choosing a deep green gown that brought out the grey in her eyes, understanding that today would mark a turning point in multiple ways. Edmund sought her father out immediately after breakfast, requesting a private audience in the study. Helena waited in the morning room with her mother and the other female guests, trying to appear calm, despite the anticipation thrumming through her veins. Lady Brookstone could barely contain her excitement, alternating between beaming smiles and nervous fidgeting. "My dear girl," she whispered, squeezing Helena's hand, "this is everything I hoped for you. The Duke of Ashford. I confess I worried, after your sisters married so well, that perhaps fate had forgotten you. But it seems you were simply waiting for the grandest match of all." Helena appreciated her mother's joy, even if the reasoning behind it differed from her own feelings. For Lady Brookstone, this was triumph of social ambition realized. For Helena, it was culmination of finding genuine connection with someone who understood and valued her authentic self. Both perspectives held validity, though Helena's felt infinitely more meaningful. Sir William emerged from the study within half an hour, his expression pleased but somewhat overwhelmed. He embraced Helena warmly when she approached, whispering in her ear, "He loves you very much, and I believe you love him. That is all that matters. You have my blessing and my confidence that you will manage the responsibilities ahead with your characteristic grace." "Thank you, Papa," Helena murmured, feeling emotion clog her throat at his simple affirmation of her capabilities. Edmund appeared moments later, his expression radiating quiet joy. "Miss Brookstone," he said formally, though his eyes sparkled with warmth, "would you do me the honor of walking with me in the conservatory? I have a question I would like to ask you." It was pure formality. Everyone knew what question he intended, and everyone understood she would accept. But Helena appreciated the gesture nonetheless. She took his offered arm, and they walked together through corridors now familiar, toward the glass-enclosed space where they had previously discussed her candidacy for his duchess. The conservatory was warm despite winter cold outside, heated for the plants that drowsed through the season. Edmund led Helena to a bench near the center of the space, where they could see garden views while remaining in comfortable warmth. He took both her hands in his expression serious despite the happiness evident in his features. "Helena," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I never expected to find someone who understood me as you do, who saw past my title to the lonely man beneath it. You have transformed my understanding of what marriage might be, not obligation or alliance, but genuine partnership with someone whose presence makes everything better." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I know I am not the easiest man to love. I carry grief and guilt that sometimes make me remote. I have responsibilities that will demand time and attention, even when I would rather focus solely on you. My position brings scrutiny and expectation that will affect you as well if you accept my proposal. But I promise to honor you, to value your intelligence and independence, to create with you a marriage based on honesty and mutual respect." Edmund released one of her hands to withdraw a small velvet box from his coat pocket. Opening it, revealed a ring of stunning beauty, a large sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in gold that caught the winter light and blazed with inner fire. "This was my mother's betrothal ring," Edmund said quietly. "The Dowager Duchess has been keeping it safe these many years, waiting for me to find someone worthy of wearing it. I believe that person is you, Helena. Will you marry me? Will you become my duchess, my partner, my wife?" Helena felt tears slide down her cheeks despite her attempt at composure. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Edmund, I will marry you. I will be your duchess, your partner, your wife. I will help you transform Ashford House from monument to home. I will stand beside you through whatever challenges come. I love you, and I choose you, freely and completely." Edmund slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her rather than inherited from his mother. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly while she wept quietly against his shoulder. These were not tears of sadness, but rather overwhelming joy and relief that the long wait had finally led here, to this moment, to this man who loved her. They remained in the conservatory for some time, simply holding each other and speaking quietly about their future. Edmund shared his hopes for their marriage, the children he wanted to fill Ashford House with laughter, the improvements he envisioned for the estate with Helena's partnership, the life they would build together based on the foundation of genuine understanding they had already established. Helena spoke of her own hopes, creating warmth in the grand but lonely house, becoming involved with tenant welfare beyond mere charity, perhaps even influencing Edmund's political work through thoughtful discussion if he welcomed such input. She admitted her nervousness about the scrutiny that would come with being Duchess, but expressed confidence that together they could manage whatever challenges arose. "We should return and make the announcement," Edmund said eventually, though reluctance was evident in his tone. "Though I confess I would prefer to remain here with you indefinitely." "So would I," Helena admitted. "But duty calls, and I suspect our absence has been noted. They are probably all waiting eagerly for confirmation of what everyone already knows." They walked back to the drawing room hand in hand, rings catching light as they moved. The assembled guests looked up as they entered, and the happiness evident in both faces made verbal announcement almost unnecessary. But Edmund insisted on proper formality, clearing his throat to gain everyone's attention. "I am pleased to announce that Miss Helena Brookstone has done me the extraordinary honor of accepting my proposal of marriage," he said, his voice carrying genuine joy beneath the formal words. "We will be married in the spring, once appropriate preparations can be made." The room erupted in congratulations. Lady Brookstone wept happy tears while embracing her daughter. Sir William shook Edmund's hand warmly, welcoming him to the family. The Ashworth siblings cheered enthusiastically, clearly delighted by the match. Even the Dowager Duchess smiled, a rare expression of approval crossing her usually stern features. "You have chosen well, Ashford," she said, approaching to examine the ring on Helena's finger. "Your mother would be pleased to see her ring on the hand of someone truly worthy of it. Miss Brookstone, you have passed every test I could devise, and I confess I was not initially convinced you would. But you possess precisely the qualities a duchess requires: intelligence, composure, and refusal to be diminished by circumstance. I will be honored to support you as you learn to navigate your new position." "Thank you, Your Grace," Helena replied, understanding the significance of the Dowager's endorsement. Having her support would smooth Helena's entry into the complex world of high society in ways that Edmund's love alone could not accomplish. The rest of the day passed in celebration. Champagne appeared at lunch, toasts were made, and the house party transformed from subtle courtship observation to genuine engagement party. Letters were dispatched immediately to Helena's sisters, informing them of her betrothal to the Duke of Ashford. Helena could imagine their reactions: Caroline's excitement, Sophia's delight, Margaret's satisfaction that their youngest sister had achieved such a match. That evening at dinner, Edmund made another announcement that surprised everyone, including Helena. "I realize traditional engagement periods extend 6 months or more," he said, standing with glass raised. "But Helena and I have already invested considerable time in knowing each other. With her agreement, I propose we marry in April rather than waiting until summer or beyond. I am eager to begin our life together, and I believe sufficient time exists for necessary preparations." All eyes turned to Helena, who felt her cheeks warm at being put on the spot. But she had no desire for prolonged engagement either. "April suits me perfectly," she said clearly. 3 months provides adequate time for arrangements without unnecessary delay." The Dowager Duchess nodded approvingly. "Sensible," she declared. "Extended engagements serve mainly to build anticipation that actual marriage can rarely fulfill. Better to proceed with reasonable efficiency once the decision is made." Over the following days, the house party concluded with various guests departing for their own holiday obligations. But the mood remained celebratory, and Helena felt increasingly comfortable in her role as Edmund's intended. The easy companionship they had developed before the proposal only deepened with formal commitment established. They spent hours together discussing practical matters: where they would live primarily, how to divide time between London and Ashford House, what role Helena would take in managing various properties. Edmund proved remarkably open to her input, genuinely valuing her perspective on matters ranging from household management to estate improvements. He shared financial information with complete transparency, ensuring she understood the scope of ducal resources and responsibilities. He introduced her to his steward and other key staff, making clear that Helena would have authority over household matters once they married. "I do not want you to feel like guest in your own home," he explained during one such discussion. "My mother was full partner in managing our properties. My father valued her judgment and deferred to her expertise in many areas. I intend the same arrangement with you. Your intelligence is one of the qualities I most admire. It would be foolish not to utilize it in building our life together." Helena appreciated this approach immensely, understanding that many aristocratic marriages relegated wives to purely decorative roles with no real authority. Edmund's willingness to share responsibility spoke to both his respect for her capabilities and his understanding that successful partnership required mutual investment. The Brookstone family departed Ashford House shortly after Christmas, returning home with Helena's betrothal ring sparking on her finger and her heart full of plans for the future. Lady Brookstone immediately began organizing wedding arrangements, consulting with Helena about preferences while managing details herself. Sir William simply watched his youngest daughter with quiet satisfaction, pleased to see her genuinely happy rather than simply resigned to her fate. Helena's sisters descended upon Brookstone Manor within days of receiving the news, all three arriving with their families in tow. The house filled with noise and activity as nieces and nephews ran through corridors and adults gathered to discuss the spectacular match Helena had secured. "The Duke of Ashford!" Caroline exclaimed for perhaps the 10th time, examining Helena's betrothal ring with obvious envy. "I cannot believe our little Helena will be a duchess. We were so worried, you know, when season after season passed without suitable offers." "I was never worried," Helena replied mildly. "I simply trusted that if marriage was meant for me, it would arrive in proper time. And it has." Sophia, always more perceptive than the others, studied Helena's face carefully. "But you love him," she said softly. "This is not simply advantageous match. You genuinely care for the Duke." "Edmund," Helena corrected gently. "Yes, I love him very much, more than I expected to be capable of loving anyone. He sees me, Sophia, truly sees who I am without needing me to perform or pretend. That is worth more than any title or property." Margaret, the eldest and most practically minded of the sisters, wanted to discuss wedding details and future arrangements. "Will you live primarily at Ashford House or maintain residence in London? What size household will you manage? Have you considered how to handle social obligations with parliamentary season?" Helena answered these questions patiently, appreciating her sister's interest, even when it veered into territory she and Edmund had not yet fully explored. The reality of becoming Duchess was beginning to settle into her awareness. This was not simply romantic fantasy, but practical undertaking with real responsibilities and challenges. But rather than feeling overwhelmed, Helena discovered she welcomed the challenge. Years of managing Brookstone Manor's household had prepared her for larger responsibilities, and Edmund's support gave her confidence to face whatever came. As winter progressed toward spring, wedding preparations intensified. The ceremony would take place at Ashford House rather than at Helena's local parish church, a decision that reflected both the Duke's position and his desire to have the wedding in what would become their primary home. Invitations went out to an impressive guest list that included members of the royal family, high-ranking peers, political figures, and close family friends. Helena found herself thrust into social whirlwind that would have been exhausting if not for Edmund's steady presence. He travelled from Derbyshire to visit her weekly, despite winter weather making the journey difficult. They continued their pattern of honest conversation and intellectual companionship, but now with added element of planning shared future. Edmund sought Helena's opinion on everything from redecorating decisions at Ashford House to political positions he was considering taking in Parliament. "You have remarkable instinct for reading situations," he told her during one visit. "Several times now you have identified concerns or implications I initially overlooked. I want that perspective available to me regularly once we are married." My political work will benefit from your insight." Helena felt pride at his confidence in her judgment, but also some trepidation. Society may not approve of a duchess involving herself so directly in political matters. Many will expect me to confine my attention to purely social and domestic concerns. "Society's expectations have never particularly concerned me," Edmund replied with slight smile. "And anyone who knows you would understand that limiting your intelligence to household management would be tremendous waste. I'm not suggesting you take public political role, but private advisor? Absolutely. My father consulted my mother on everything important. I see no reason to depart from that model simply because some members of society cling to outdated notions of proper feminine behavior." Such conversations reassured Helena that Edmund's vision of their marriage aligned with her own hopes. She would not be ornamental duchess existing merely to look attractive at Edmund's side. Instead, she would be genuine partner, contributing her capabilities toward shared goals and building life of substance beyond social performance. The Dowager Duchess became unexpected ally during this period, inviting Helena to London for a week of intensive education in navigating high society. "You have natural dignity and intelligence," she explained, "but you lack experience with the particular customs and expectations of the highest social circles. Better to learn from someone who will be honest about your mistakes than to face judgment from those who wish you ill." The week proved simultaneously exhausting and valuable. The Dowager introduced Helena to influential women whose goodwill would smooth her entry into society as Duchess. She taught Helena the subtle hierarchies of precedence and protocol that governed aristocratic interactions. She explained which social obligations could be declined and which required attendance regardless of personal preference. And throughout, she offered frank assessment of Helena's strengths and weaknesses. "You have tendency toward too much honesty," the Dowager observed after one social call where Helena had expressed opinions more directly than convention suggested appropriate. "While I appreciate your refusal to dissemble, you must understand that high society functions partly on polite fictions. Not everything you think needs to be spoken aloud." "But is that not dishonest?" Helena protested. "Pretending agreement when one actually disagrees? Expressing pleasure at things one finds tedious?" "It is diplomatic," the Dowager corrected. "There is difference between lying and exercising discretion about when to share your full perspective. You need not pretend opinions you do not hold. But neither must you announce your true thoughts on every subject. Learn to redirect conversation, to offer neutral observations that satisfy social obligation without compromising your integrity." Helena absorbed these lessons with characteristic determination, understanding they were intended to help rather than criticize. The Dowager genuinely wanted her to succeed as Duchess, partly from loyalty to Edmund, but also from recognition that Helena possessed qualities worth preserving despite their unconventionality. "You will be good Duchess," the Dowager said at the end of their week together, "not because you perfectly conform to expectations, but because you care about the responsibilities involved and possess intelligence to learn what you do not instinctively know. Ashford is fortunate to have found you." The week in London also provided opportunity for Edmund to show Helena more of his life there. He maintained elegant townhouse in Mayfair that would serve as their London residence during parliamentary season. Unlike the vast emptiness of Ashford House, the London property felt more intimate, designed for comfortable living rather than impressing visitors. "I prefer it here in many ways," Edmund admitted, as he showed Helena through the rooms. "The scale is more manageable, the obligations less overwhelming, but duty requires presence at Ashford House for a significant portion of each year, and I would not wish to neglect the estate or tenants who depend upon ducal attention." "Then we will divide our time," Helena said practically. "London during parliamentary season when your political work demands presence here, Ashford House during other months when we can focus on estate management and family life. It seems reasonable compromise." "Family life," Edmund repeated, his expression softening. "I confess I think about that often now. Children filling Ashford House with noise and activity, transforming those empty rooms into spaces of genuine life. You want children, do you not?" "Very much," Helena replied honestly. "I have watched my sisters with their children and felt envious of that particular joy. But Edmund, You should know that I will not judge our marriage's success solely by whether we produce heirs. If children do not come, or if they come but not in abundance, it will not diminish my love for you or satisfaction in our partnership." Edmund pulled her close, his embrace warm and reassuring. "I love that about you. Your ability to hold hopes without letting them become demands. Yes, I want children, want to fill Ashford House with family. But you are right that our marriage's value extends beyond reproductive success. We will build life of meaning and purpose together, regardless of how many children bless us." As March arrived and wedding date approached, Helena felt increasingly ready for this transition. She had spent weeks learning what would be required of her as Duchess, had experienced enough of Edmund's world to understand both its privileges and its challenges. More importantly, her love for him had only deepened through this period of preparation. She knew his fears and vulnerabilities now, understood the losses that had shaped him, recognized the strength required to remain open to love despite past grief. And Edmund knew her with equal depth, her intelligence that sometimes intimidated others, her directness that could seem abrasive, her independence that refused to be subsumed even by marriage. He loved these qualities rather than despite them, wanted her exactly as she was rather than some modified version that conformed more comfortably to conventional expectations. The final weeks before the wedding passed in organized chaos. Family arrived at Ashford House for extended stays. Helena's parents and 3 sisters with their families, Edmund's Ashworth cousins, the Dowager Duchess taking up residence to oversee final preparations. The house filled with laughter and activity, no longer echoing emptiness, but instead resonating with sounds of genuine life. Helena watched Edmund move through these days with visible joy, seeing him transformed by having family around him. He was particularly wonderful with his nieces and nephews by marriage, patient with their questions, and willing to join their games despite ducal dignity. She could imagine him as father, could picture children of their own receiving the same attention and affection. The night before the wedding, Helena could not sleep despite exhaustion from final preparations. She rose and wrapped herself in a dressing gown, thinking to perhaps read for a while until drowsiness returned. But as she moved through quiet corridors toward the library, she encountered Edmund engaged in similar restlessness. "Cannot sleep?" he asked with understanding smile. "Too much anticipation," Helena admitted. "Tomorrow changes everything." "Tomorrow makes official what has already been true for months," Edmund corrected gently. "We have already committed to each other in every way that matters. The ceremony simply allows the world to witness what we have known privately." They walked together to the conservatory, their nighttime sanctuary where so many important conversations had occurred. The space was dark, except for moonlight filtering through glass walls, creating ethereal atmosphere that felt removed from ordinary world. "Are you frightened?" Edmund asked, the same question he had posed months earlier. "No," Helena replied truthfully. "I am excited, eager, impatient to begin our life together officially, but not frightened. How could I fear future with someone who knows and loves me as you do?" Edmund gathered her into his arms, holding her close in the moonlit space. "I never believed I would feel this way about anyone," he said quietly. "After my parents died, after years of isolation, I convinced myself I was content alone. But you have shown me that I was not content. I was merely surviving. With you, I actually live. You have given me back my capacity for joy, for hope, for imagining future that does not revolve around duty and obligation." "You have done the same for me," Helena replied. "I told myself I was happy being unmarried, that I had built satisfying life on my own. And in many ways I had. But there was something missing even if I refused to acknowledge it. You fill that space, Edmund. You make me more complete without demanding I become less myself." They stood together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms and the quiet certainty that tomorrow would mark beginning of something extraordinary. Not because they were Duke and soon-to-be Duchess, not because their marriage represented spectacular social achievement, but because they had found in each other something rare and precious, authentic love built on foundation of honesty, patience, and mutual respect. "We should return to our chambers," Edmund said eventually. Though reluctance was evident in his voice, Tomorrow will be demanding, and we both need rest." "Tomorrow I become your wife," Helena said softly. "Tomorrow I become Duchess of Ashford. Tomorrow we begin building the life we have planned and imagined for months." "Tomorrow," Edmund agreed, "and every day after. I love you, Helena." "And I love you," she replied. "More than I knew I was capable of loving anyone." They returned to their separate chambers with proper propriety, despite longing to remain together. But the knowledge that this was their last night apart made the separation bearable. Tomorrow would bring them together permanently, would transform them from individuals into partnership. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine that seemed impossibly perfect for late April wedding. Helena woke to find her chamber filled with female relatives, her mother weeping happy tears, her sisters chattering excitedly, maids moving efficiently to help her prepare. The wedding gown was masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, elegant without being ostentatious, perfect for woman of Helena's understated beauty. As her mother fastened the pearl necklace that had been Brookstone family heirloom for generations, Helena met her own gaze in the looking-glass. The woman reflected there looked confident, radiant, ready for the momentous step she was about to take. Gone was any trace of the overlooked younger sister who had watched others marry while wondering if her own turn would come. In her place stood someone who had discovered her worth through patience and self-knowledge, who had refused to diminish herself for others' comfort, and who had ultimately been claimed by someone who valued exactly those qualities. "You are beautiful," her mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "And I am so proud of you, my darling girl. You waited for the right person rather than accepting what was merely available. You trusted yourself when the world suggested you should be desperate, and now you will be Duchess. We'll have everything you deserve." "I already have everything I need," Helena replied gently. "Edmund's love, his respect, his partnership. The title is secondary to that." The ceremony took place in Ashford House's private chapel, a beautiful space that had witnessed generations of ducal family celebrations and sorrows. Spring flowers filled every corner, roses, lilies, tulips in abundance, their fragrance mixing with sunlight, streaming through stained glass windows to create atmosphere of sacred joy. Edmund waited at the altar with Thomas Ashworth serving as his witness, his expression transforming as Helena appeared in the doorway on her father's arm. The love visible in his face was so complete, so evident, that several guests gasped at the naked emotion displayed by the usually reserved Duke. Helena processed slowly down the aisle, her eyes locked on Edmund's, seeing in his gaze reflection of her own overwhelming feeling. This was right, absolutely right, the culmination of every choice and experience that had brought them to this moment. Sir William placed Helena's hand in Edmund's with visible emotion, whispering blessing that only they could hear before stepping back to join his wife. The ceremony proceeded with traditional words and rituals, but Helena barely registered the formality. Her awareness centered entirely on Edmund, his voice steady as he made his vows, his hands warm and slightly trembling as he placed the wedding ring on her finger, his eyes never leaving hers as they were pronounced husband and wife. When the vicar finally gave permission for the groom to kiss his bride, Edmund drew Helena close with tender reverence, his lips meeting hers in kiss that spoke of promise and devotion. It was chaste by necessity, given their very public audience, but it carried weight of all they felt for each other, all they would become together. "My Duchess," Edmund whispered against her lips, too quietly for others to hear. "My Helena." "My husband," she replied with equal softness. "My Edmund." The wedding breakfast that followed was magnificent affair befitting ducal celebration. Ashford House's ballroom had been transformed into wonderland of flowers and candlelight, tables laden with delicacies, champagne flowing freely. Toasts were made celebrating the new Duke and Duchess of Ashford, many guests remarking on how perfectly suited the couple appeared. The Dowager Duchess, in a private moment with Helena, offered final blessing. "You have done it," she said simply. "How you have taken Lonely House and begun transforming it into home. You have taken broken man who thought himself beyond healing and shown him how to love again. That is no small accomplishment, my dear Duchess. Your mother-in-law would have been very proud." Helena felt tears threaten at this acknowledgement, from the formidable woman who had been her sternest judge. "Thank you, Your Grace. I will do my best to honor the position and the family I have married into." "Just love him," the dowager said tartly. "That is all anyone requires of you. Love him, give him children if you are blessed with them, and help him remember that duty need not preclude joy. The rest will sort itself out." As evening approached and guests began departing, Edmund found Helena on terrace overlooking the gardens. The spring air was soft and mild, carrying scent of flowers and fresh earth. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder in gesture of comfortable intimacy. "Happy?" he asked quietly. "Extraordinarily so," Helena replied, leaning back against him, "though I confess I will be relieved when the celebration concludes and we can simply be together without hundreds of observers." "Soon," Edmund promised. "We will retire shortly, and tomorrow we begin our wedding trip to the coast. 2 weeks with no obligations beyond enjoying each other's company sounds like paradise." "It does," Helena agreed, "though I suspect even paradise will not match the joy of simply being your wife, wherever we happen to be." They remained on the terrace as twilight deepened, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Around them, Ashford House glowed with light and laughter, no longer monument to past glories, but instead living space filled with present joy. Helena thought about the journey that had brought her here, years of watching her sisters marry, of wondering if her turn would come, of making peace with possibility that it might not. She had built life of meaning despite society's dismissal of unmarried women past certain age. She had developed skills and strengths that now positioned her perfectly for the responsibilities of being Duchess. She had learned patience and self-knowledge that allowed her to recognize Edmund's worth when he appeared in her life. None of it had been wasted, not the years of waiting, not the moments of doubt, not the quiet determination to remain authentic rather than twist herself into shapes meant to attract male attention. Everything had led to this moment, to this man, to this life they would build together. "I love you," she said, turning in Edmund's arms to face him directly. "I love you for seeing me when others overlooked me. I love you for valuing my intelligence rather than being threatened by it. I love you for your honesty, your vulnerability, your willingness to risk love despite past loss. I love you for transforming what could have been merely advantageous match into genuine partnership." Edmund's expression held such tenderness that Helena felt her breath catch. "And I love you for your patience, your strength, your refusal to compromise who you are for anyone's comfort. I love you for teaching me that loneliness is choice rather than fate, that opening oneself to connection is worth the risk of eventual pain. I love you for being exactly who you are, my brilliant, beautiful, remarkable Helena." They kissed again, longer and deeper than propriety had allowed during the ceremony, tasting promise of their future in each other's mouths. When they finally separated, both were breathless and smiling. "Come," Edmund said, taking her hand. "Let us bid our guests farewell and retire to our chambers. I am eager to begin this marriage properly, without ceremony or observers, or anything except you and me and the life we will create together." Helena allowed him to lead her back inside, her hand secure in his, her heart full of joy and anticipation. She had waited years for this moment, had almost convinced herself it might never come. But patience had proven worthwhile, waiting had led somewhere beautiful. And now she stood on threshold of future more wonderful than anything she had imagined during those long years of apparent rejection. She was Helena Fairley, Duchess of Ashford. But more importantly, she was Edmund's wife, his partner, his chosen companion for whatever years they were granted. And that, more than any title, more than any property, more than any social triumph, was everything she had ever truly wanted. The Duke of Ashford had not claimed her out of duty or obligation or strategic alliance. He had claimed her with love, genuine and deep and freely given, and Helena had claimed him in return, with equal passion and conviction. They had both waited, Edmund hiding behind walls built from grief and caution, Helena patient in her quiet dignity and self-knowledge. But the waiting had ended, replaced by joining that promised fulfillment neither had quite believed possible. As they climbed the grand staircase toward their shared chambers, Helena felt profound gratitude for every experience that had shaped her journey. The overlooked years had not been punishment, but preparation. The patience had not been passive resignation, but active cultivation of qualities that would serve her well as Duchess. The quiet strength developed through apparent rejection was exactly what she needed to stand beside Edmund as equal partner rather than subordinate ornament. And Edmund, walking beside her with her hand clasped firmly in his, felt similar gratitude for his own long journey through grief and loneliness toward this moment of connection and hope. Helena had given him back his capacity for joy, had shown him that vulnerability was strength rather than weakness, had proven that love was worth risking despite inevitable pain of eventual loss. Together they crossed the threshold into their private chambers, closing the door on the world outside and opening themselves to whatever future would bring. There would be challenges ahead. Every marriage faced them. There would be sorrows mixed with joys, disappointments alongside triumphs, but they would face everything together as partners committed to honesty and mutual support. And in the years that followed, Ashford House did indeed transform from lonely monument into vibrant home. Children came, 3 sons and 2 daughters, who filled the rooms with laughter and noise, who made the grand corridors echo with footsteps and shouts, who transformed what had been museum into actual family residence. Helena proved exceptional Duchess, managing vast household and multiple properties with competence that impressed even skeptical observers. But more importantly, she remained authentically herself, intelligent, direct, independent, refusing to diminish her capabilities for anyone's comfort. Edmund valued this throughout their marriage, consulting her on everything from political decisions to estate management, recognizing that her judgment strengthened his own. They had difficult times, certainly, grief when children fell ill, political setbacks that threatened Edmund's influence, financial pressures that required careful navigation. But they faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthened rather than weakened by adversity. And always, in quiet moments stolen from duty and obligation, they returned to each other with renewed appreciation for the unlikely path that had brought them together. The overlooked daughter and the cautious duke, both convinced they might never find genuine connection, who discovered in each other exactly what they needed. Their love story was not a dramatic tale of instant passion and overwhelming emotion. Instead, it was quieter narrative of patience rewarded, authenticity valued, and genuine partnership cultivated through deliberate choice and sustained commitment. Helena had watched her sisters marry lords one by one while years passed in apparent rejection, but she had not been overlooked by fate. She had been waiting for something better, something deeper, something worth the long patience. And when the Duke of Ashford finally appeared in her life, when he looked past surface to see who she actually was, when he claimed her with love rather than duty, every year of waiting proved worthwhile. For love that comes through patience and genuine recognition is love that endures. And Helena and Edmund's love endured through decades of shared life, through challenges and triumphs, through the ordinary moments that comprise actual existence rather than romantic fantasy. They grew old together at Ashford House, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, who knew them not as Duke and Duchess, but simply as loving couple whose devotion to each other never wavered. And when they were finally laid to rest side by side in the family chapel where they had married so many years before, those who remembered their story understood they had witnessed something rare, genuine love between equals, freely chosen and faithfully maintained. Helena Brookstone had become Helena Fairley, Duchess of Ashford, but more essentially, she had simply become herself, fully, valued, loved and cherished, exactly as she was. And that was the greatest triumph of all. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful journey through Helena and Edmund's love story. If this tale of patience, authentic love and finding your perfect match touched your heart, we would be absolutely delighted if you would subscribe to our channel, Echoes of Romance, so you never miss another enchanting story. Please leave us a comment, sharing your thoughts. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and activate those notifications so you'll be the first to know when we release our next romantic tale. Your support means everything to us, and we cannot wait to share more stories of love, hope, and happily ever afters with you. Until next time, dear friends, May your own lives be filled with the kind of love that waits patiently and arrives perfectly.